Speaking after Mr. Too Tall Price is always requires some adjustments. Now, if I had the face and figure of Nancy Gertner, I'd stand to the side and let you enjoy it. But that departed some years ago. In any event, when I went to the vaunted institution in the town next door in 1951, I was taking all English courses because I thought if you're going to write, you ought to know a bit about English. But I did take a philosophy course from a visiting professor from Oxford University in London named Hart. And on the first day when he greeted the class, he said, "I think we shall proceed splendidly through this study if we can but surmount the barrier of our common language." And ladies and gentlemen, we have yet to do that, so far as I know. Nancy is dead right. Lawyers can't speak, nor can most other people. It is deteriorating, and I will flesh out this indictment as I go along because it's never too late. I say that as one who is the only octogenarian on the program, but also the only Marine, and one probably explains the other. I still wake up in the morning looking forward, if a just opportunity presents itself, to kicking ass and taking names, which is what Marines do. It is discouraging, however, when your internist gives you a prescription and said your condition is such you're going to have to take this for the rest of your life, which in and of itself is not so daunting if you've got coverage until you look at the bottom where it says no refills. This is a world where you need to keep your hands high at all times, even when you are before one of the best judges that this Commonwealth or the federal bench ever spawned. And I must tell you, just parenthetically, that is a lonely profession. Nancy Gertner would no more be allowed to have a drink with me, her former colleague, while wearing the robe than she'd be allowed to disrobe on the bench. It just is not done, although the viewers would have profited somewhat if she had done so, without question. I was, in my last engagement with her, of a formal nature, a witness in a case where the FBI, together with my client, had framed 4 people for murder, 3 of whom were sentenced to death, 2 of whom died in prison. 1 got out after 30 years, and 1 got out after about 34. The sad thing is that even though the culprit, who had been encouraged by certain rogue agents, and I'm very pleased to say that next month I will once again be lecturing for the FBI because I am not a detractor but a fan. Nonetheless, these guys, one of them died under indictment for murder, and in my view, he got off easy. He had done a lot during his time as a rogue. But the disturbing thing was, when we look around at the efficacy of our judiciary nationwide, and we consider the finality of taking another life in a punishment mode, whether you use the needle, electric chair, the gas, or a firing squad, it is the ultimate conceit from which there should be no forgiveness for being wrong. The Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court unanimously, on the uncorroborated word of a man who admitted in open court he had killed 26 people, but was being given a pass by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts because he was testifying against these 4. And by the way, they were chosen this way. The FBI said, look, if you will name some people in the Deegan murder, just a cheap gunsel who got knocked down in Cambridge or Somerville, not far away, He said, you can pick two that you don't like, and we'll give you two names we don't like, who happen to be a reputed mafioso. And that case was affirmed unanimously by the Massachusetts Supreme Court, and three of the defendants were slated to die. By coincidence, and that alone, the shame that would have attended upon that, now that Judge Gertner has found that these people were in fact innocent and awarded them substantial damages, a little late, but better than nothing, I should think. The U.S. Supreme Court outlawed all capital punishment, and their lives were spared. That is pretty chancy. Part of it is because of the quality of the system, and that comes right back to the quality of the people who operate it. When human life depends upon the ability of the speaker, perhaps the only speaker for the accused, to control the king's English and put sentences together that do persuade, that illuminate what are properly called reasonable doubts. When that skill falters, justice is seldom done. A couple of colleagues of mine named Barry Scheck and Peter Neufeld, after the O.J. trial, where they handled the DNA evidence, and a comparatively young science, but rearing its head as more devastating in terms of accuracy than anything else in the barrel of forensic tools. They wrote a book called Actual Innocence, and it identified 95 people on death row who shouldn't have been convicted of anything. Most were victims of eyewitness identification. Almost everyone was a victim of a casual defense from a not very skillful and badly overloaded defense lawyer who, if he had been able to get a job in a big firm because of his ability to command the English language, would have done so. And the horrifying statistic, beyond any doubt, is that if all these people were discovered after DNA came to the fore, how many did we execute before who were no more guilty than these? We learn slowly, I'm afraid. We have let articulation, and I'm not talking about writing. A goodly number of people can write well, not very many can speak well, and do so without crutches and other aids to guide them along their way. I credit the President of the United States, who began office as a better speaker than he is now, probably because he's been beat up a fair amount. But he did give a pretty coherent State of the Union address the other night. His crutches were on the lectern before him, but he didn't look at them. And for that, he has my admiration. Part of the effect of that, and this is the key to persuasion, you can be slick and you can bop the words around and look pretty smart, but if your heart is not in what you're saying, if you don't really believe it, people with more than half a brain will figure it out rather quickly. There is an element to elocution called sincerity, and it is as essential as the ability to move your larynx when you have something to say. And that's what is being chased away. And it is tragic. The English language has become polluted with bywords such as "you know." How many athletes have you heard interviewed? Even Tom Brady has done this now, to my chagrin, who can complete a sentence without saying "you know," sometimes 4 or 5 times. An absolutely meaningless defensive interjection which detracts from the quality of the message, but seems to be unshakable. Lately, a worse offender has wormed its way into conversation, and that is like. Children started saying it 20 years ago. Now I find offenders in their 60s who say, and like I came home and like you were there. And what does that add to the message being conveyed? I think a corner or a chunk of idiocy. Why do people not, since they generally pay some attention to their appearance, they put clothes on, they wear makeup if they're female, many of them, in order to look good. Why don't they give a damn if they sound good or if they can speak well? Good speakers are generally at the head of most professions and many industrial companies, of political machines, because harking back to the days of the Chautauqua Circuit, when the lawyers could speak, and sometimes did so for 4 and 5 days in a row, giving a closing argument. I knew a few of those. I came in at the tail end of that group, which was then taken over by Edward Bennett Williams, who not only could speak, but also prepared his cases. He was my mentor, thank God, because I learned that that is the cornerstone of every case. And if you're not prepared, you can talk to you blue in the face, but you're probably going to get caught with your trousers at half-mast somewhere along the way. So, to persuade, one needs to do several things. First of all, do not write out what you're going to say. The written word and the spoken word are not really related. Perhaps I should say the technique of the spoken word. A good speaker, the ones who get good fees to come to a convention and be the keynote or the cleanup, these are the ones that get the most pay. I like those roles best. But they have to be able to have in their heads what they're going to say, how many times they're going to say it, and what they're going to conclude about their audience from moment to moment as they go along. Now, how in the world can you do that if you're not keeping your eyes on the people you're talking to? I wouldn't dream of cross-examining a witness with any notes in front of me. I want my eyes on that witness. If he's going to lie, his eyes will tell me long before his larynx does. If I have pissed off the judge, I will most likely see it in her eyes before she vocalizes her reaction. And the jury. One has to keep looking around from time to time and to modify the tempo, the stance, the level of articulation, whatever it takes to keep that audience happy, entertained, interesting, and whether they agree or disagree, you're getting the job done if you can maintain those conditions. Now, all of this does not fall into place simply from going to Harvard College. I went to Harvard College because I applied to Harvard and Bowdoin and couldn't afford Bowdoin. That's the exact truth. Harvard College was $600 a year in 1950 if you lived at home. I was the editor of my school paper, these are journalistic credentials, at prep school, Kimball Union Academy. I was a reporter for the Harvard Crimson. As a commuter, all of us belonged to Dunster House, which was just kind of a smoke-filled room. I was discriminated against by the wealthies who ran the Crimson and got very few assignments. But I had made up my mind to go in the service, help defeat all the bad guys that were running around in Korea, and then come back and get my degree in English and become a journalist. Because I wanted to write the great American novel. I finally did. I don't know how great it was, but it was on the New York Times list for a while, and it was about a lawyer standing trial for murder. I knew in order to write the great American novel, I had to live a little. I didn't know anything. Now, in the Marine Corps, you learn to live pretty quick, particularly in the aviation arm, because if you're not a quick learner, you die. The attrition rate in naval flight training is higher than any combat percentage in all of history. It's just a very dangerous thing to do. Those of us who live through it enjoy a certain amount of self-confidence that it's tough to get any other way. And while I was doing my time and running around in jet airplanes, they ran out of legal officers. Every squadron is supposed to have one. We had a couple of airplanes blow up on takeoff, and lo and behold, the pilots were both in the legal department. So I got called in by the commanding officer, and he said, we have a volunteer system in the Marine Corps, and you are now the legal officer. And I said, look, I haven't graduated college yet. I don't know anything about law. How did I get selected? He said, it's a scientific system by chance. Your name begins BA, and that is the highest on the alphabetic list of all your squadron mates, so that's what you are. Well, I gave it a short argument, tried to find if there are any openings in OBGYN or something more interesting, but I got stuck in the legal department, and it changed my life, quite literally. I still managed to write a little bit, have about 21 books out there in the market someplace, some of them pretty dead, but nonetheless, it has been a good mixture with one thing always at the forefront. Whatever I am engaged in, for better or for worse, and right or wrong, whether giving a speech, arguing to a court, arguing to a jury, or with some other lawyers, or writing. Communications is at the pinnacle, in my view, of the better side of human existence. No one would enjoy standing in a cell like a Nelson Mandela for 20 years all alone. We cannot thrive without the interaction of the very considerable people, like those on this program, like Bruce Price and Nancy Edersheim, whose friendship I have enjoyed now for a number of years. We just can't partake without the ability to go back and forth and be understood, and at the end of the day, to be persuasive. I might say that the night I met Bruce Price, he was lecturing to a group called the 49ers, which is a young president's organization. When they get gray hair, they get kicked out and join the 49ers. And he was telling us about some medical matter and drifted over to the question of resveratrol. Not a few among us were fans of the grape, and so he began to explain why there was some benefit to be had, particularly in the cardiac section of your machinery, if you ingested resveratrol. And he pointed out the fact that if you had a glass of wine a day, or if you were a man, 2 glasses of red wine a day, it could be good for you. Well, I heard this news with a certain amount of joy. And I asked him, Dr. Price, supposing you had 5 glasses a day? He said that would be even better for you until they caught you driving. And you better have a lawyer by your side at all times, and preferably a driver. From that interchange, a springboard arose, and I have a very valuable association to whom I have had to turn on more than one occasion for advice. And I must tell you, one thing fighter pilots don't indulge in very much is getting advice. Number two, you're all alone up there in the cockpit. Nobody can help you. They might say turn left and you could find the ship. But beyond that, you're on your own, for better or for worse, and it is one of the many ways to go through life. I happen to think that unless you are content with your own ability to wake up every day and solve the woolly-woolies that come marching down the pike to confound you, that you're not living the kind of life that you should have. But certainly, since all of us like to be respected, and all of us like to be somebody, not just a fellow who digs a trench from 8 to 5, that the ability to communicate, much prized, although deflating, a word which is important this week, deflating, as time goes on, is something worth working for and training for. And although it may be difficult to teach your kids and grandkids that it is not good to say you know, it is not good to say like, and it is not good to start a sentence with so unless there's a sentence before it to which it relates. These are increasingly difficult lessons to get across. And the number of people who on a daily basis and habitual knowledge is the golden nugget of a personality. Habitual knowledge that you can pull up just like that when the situation is appropriate is a wonderful thing. And if your memory has been trained from the time that you were very young, as in my case, I was too lazy to make notes. So I didn't. I just remembered everything. I got thrown out of school twice for cheating because I put down no computations. On my arithmetic exam, I just wrote the answers down. And that was conclusive evidence that I was copying from someone. When my mother came to school, much outraged, to complain about my expulsion, she demanded to know what the scores were of the people abutting me in the exam room. And I think I had a 90-something and no one had about 70. And she asked what I thought was a very pithy question. Who did he copy from? And finally won the case on the second round. I have a thought which I think is germane to what I view as a critical situation. I have a passion for the New England Patriots, which is totally unbridled. Nothing is too good for them, in my view. And nothing is worse than reading today columnists in USA Today and the Wall Street Journal saying, well, there isn't any evidence against them, but their stories denying guilt are suspect. Now, what the hell is that all about? Did the burden of proof just flip? And someone says, you robbed the bank this morning, and you have to come up with an alibi and go to jail. Spygate, which was overblown and Belichick was forced to cave in, it was as phony as hell. A coach that Belichick had fired went to work for Rex Ryan, who was not a big fan of the Patriots, I want to tell you that. And suddenly it appeared that a revelation was afoot. Signals were being taped. They have absolutely no use for that game. They're part of what everybody does. If you can see the other guy's signal, it's fair game. Taping them so you can't lie about it later, apparently, was a serious offense. I thought Kraft kind of threw Belichick to the wolves when he said, I've explained to Bill that in my group of companies, we don't cheat, and paid a $500,000 fine. The problem is that as wrong as something like that may be, When you get accused a second time, the world leaps to the conclusion he's done it again. And so, without any logical attempt to figure out the science in deflating a football to get an edge, even though both sides are using it, people have jumped to the conclusion. It reminds me of what Henry Lee said most tellingly in the OJ trial. He said, something is wrong. Well, I guess if 11 of 12 footballs are 2 pounds under the norm, something might be wrong. It would take a lot to persuade me that at a temperature of 19 degrees with the wind blowing at 30 miles an hour and the rain coming down in sheets, that could really have a lot to do with the ability to hurl or catch a football, or that it would help one side more than another. However, there is a penalty in this world for being a winner, as a lot of people notice that you are and they are not. I think one could write a column today pinning this whole thing in the Baltimore Ravens as sour grapes. Now, I don't have any evidence of that, but people don't seem to be requiring evidence at this juncture. So what a nice diversion that might be. There is a reason that this thing is rumbling around in the mud and getting a lot of attention. And I point the finger at the United States practice of law and its judiciary. For years and years and years, there has been a scientific device, a very simple one, that measures physiological changes and correlates them to deception or the telling of truth. Judges have used every trick in the book, except a handful who have gone the other way, to keep it out of their courtrooms as if it were a usurper of their functions. The 95 people on death row discovered by Scheck and Neufeld could all have passed a polygraph, but nobody gave them one. I embraced, because I was appointed a legal officer and investigations officer, polygraph testing in 1954. When I became a civilian lawyer, I found that nobody else liked it. Lawyers would come up to me and say, why are you doing this? You want to screw up the practice? You want your clients to have to tell the truth? They'll all go away. That's no good. And the fact is, I was called upon by one of Bruce's associations of neuropsychiatrists some years ago to comment on whether the MRI could evolve into a good polygraph machine or good detection of deception instrument. And the answer is maybe. An awful lot of work has to be done. It's not very practical. Lugging an MRI around the fields of Afghanistan, where polygraphs are used a great deal, is a bit clumsy. But I explained to the audience, that's not the issue. The world is not yet ready to tell the truth habitually. It's okay to tell grandma she looks fine when you know she's on her deathbed. There are a few other white lies out there, but mostly lying is an instrumentation devised by the devil. And good judges all hate it and hope that the jury can spot it when they do. But whether or not there was evil enmeshed in deflating of the footballs, if they were deflated, and whether or not the two people that are being accused really knew anything about it, which logically is not very likely. It would be expedient, and the Patriots desperately need this boost right now. They're going into the Super Bowl suspect, and that is egregious and disgusting. If someone starting with Bill Belichick and Tom Brady, and probably not having to go very far before the culprit jumped up, said, okay, I don't want to take it. The public could at least be reassured that arguably the best team in the whole United States does not win games by cheating, if that would be an effective cheat. And I hope that before next weekend rolls round, somebody catches on to that and embraces it. The FBI gives 75,000 tests a year. Sandra Day O'Connor once asked the Solicitor General, isn't that quite a lot of tests to give on something that doesn't work? In Maine, if someone passes a polygraph with a credible examiner, the case goes away. In the military, we never prosecuted anyone who cleared out, but we found generally the guy who did it. And if the law has failed, and it has a very bumpy, checkered past, although the federal courts in particular are coming out. By the way, the state of New Mexico has used this evidence routinely in civil and criminal cases since 1973 without any backlash. So I divert to this topic because although it is not directly related to the art of persuasion, it is, as a technique, as persuasive as anything we have, more accurate than judges, juries, referees, and others in many cases where it can be used. Often it cannot. In this case, it certainly could. What did you know, and when did you know it? That's simple enough. So, I am very appreciative of having been summoned to this hallowed chamber today, and I conclude by reiterating the words of Professor Hart. If we can but surmount the barrier of our common language, we will proceed splendidly. Thank you.